Please welcome Taryn Grome, Editor-in-Chief and co-founder of PharmaVOICE, to the stage.
Thank you all. It's so great to see you here. On behalf of Lisa Bankett, Mara Walsh, and the entire PharmaVOICE enterprise, we want to thank you for being here with us tonight at the lovely Chelsea Piers. What a venue. We launched the PharmaVOICE 100 15 years ago, hard to believe, but there it is, with the vision to identify that intangible measure of a person's influence, inspiration. Over the past 15 years, our aspiration has turned into a movement. Look at you all. We are delighted to have more than 110 honorees with us here this evening, as well as scores of other of our friends who have raised their voices on the topics and trends that impact the industry from molecule to market. All of you have made our goal of creating a forum of industry executives a success. And for that, we sincerely thank you. Give yourselves a big. Each year, the celebration is centered around a unifying theme. This year is no different. We asked our PharmaVOICE 100 honorees to imagine the possibilities. What might the future of healthcare look like? These aspirational responses can be seen on the various screens around the venue, as well as in the celebration publication. We hope you will be inspired to think about what might be possible for yourself, for your company, and more importantly, for patients. Imagine if, by following the science, we made disease a word of the past. Imagine if healthcare was a right and not a privilege. Imagine if there were no social determinants of health. Imagine if new drugs were developed in weeks, not years. Imagine if our leadership was as diverse as our population. Imagine if we could bring humanity back to healthcare. Our esteemed panel of PharmaVOICE 100 and Red Jacket honorees will also explore what might be possible if we think beyond our current boundaries and unleash our imagination to create a healthier world. Before I introduce our panel, I would like to thank our diamond sponsor, Sunovion, for its generous support of the Executive Forum. Sunovion is committed to bringing forward therapies for serious medical conditions and innovating to help transform people's lives. At the same time, the company plays an increasingly active role in the future of global health. The company's spirit of innovation is driven by the conviction that scientific excellence paired with meaningful advocacy and relevant education can improve lives. President and CEO of Sunovion, Dr. Anthony Lobel, a 2019 and 2013 PharmaVOICE 100 honoree, has said that one of the company's core values is to serve and create value for patients. As such, he is fostering an environment of disciplined, intellectual, and scientific freedom while ensuring that the company keeps focused on the end goal of making its medicines and solutions accessible to patients worldwide. Thank you so much, Sunovion. It's now my great privilege to introduce our dynamic panel of thought leaders for tonight. Melinda, I hand it over to you. Take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Taryn. And thank you all of us for thank you all of you for joining us here tonight. And we're going to talk about imagining the future, as Taryn was talking about. But before we do that, I just want to take a moment to say how thankful I am for how much we've accomplished as an industry up until now. We've always thought about 2020 as the future. And now here we are. We're on the cusp of 2020, and we have so much to be grateful for what you have all invested in. So, for example, who would have thought we would have been able to turn HIV from a death sentence into a chronic disease, and now, in fact, work on a vaccine for HIV? Who would have thought we'd go from having a 3% survival rate of children with leukemia to having a 93% survival rate? Who would have thought we'd have a cure for hepatitis C. These are amazing things, and it's because of the dedication and commitment of many people like you every day who make this work. So thank you for all of that. And yet there are so many more hurdles yet to overcome, so many more things we have yet to do, and we cannot go without saying that the challenges we hear, whether they're on the campaign trails like tonight, I'm sure they'll be on, we'll be all watching on TVs later, or on in the rallies about patients struggling with co-pays and insurance coverage. So we have a ways to go. So these imagine if statements are about setting a goal for the future of what we aspire to get to. And so I couldn't be more excited to hear from this panel because they represent every segment of the system. We have R&D from big company to small company. We have clinical trials to commercial. We have the experience of patients and how the system works, and we have all things digital. So we're going to hear a little bit of everything. And so with that, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give their statement about what they imagine if the system, if it could be. So we're going to start with David.
Right.
Tell us, what's your imagine if statement?
So when I started in this industry, almost all medicines were small molecules, and antibodies were just being thought about. And of course, we all take it for granted now. Most of the biggest drugs in the world are, in fact, antibody therapeutics. But we're actually on the cusp of multiple new modalities bringing new life-saving and life-changing therapies to market based on engineered red blood cells, mRNAs, the microbiome, multitude of different approaches to gene therapy. We're going to have a whole new set of options to improve patients' lives. Imagine if those patients had access to those drugs right away. Imagine if American citizens could get those drugs as quickly as they can now get them in Europe. There's quite a difference now, given all the things you mentioned, like co-pays and restrictions.
So tell us, what's the difference between the two systems? People may not know.
Yeah, so you know, so when I started, Americans always got their drugs first. You know, the FDA was quicker. The insurance companies let the products basically made them freely available. Co-pays were tiny. And in Europe, you somebody negotiated for years to get your drugs available. The insurers in this country, for lots of good reasons, and also maybe not some good reasons, have made it a bit more difficult. Co-pays, there was some study recently just said that patient has a monthly copay of $200, 40% of them won't fill a prescription. In Europe, that system just doesn't exist. You walk into the pharmacy, you get your drug, maybe there's a de minimis copay. And I think it's kind of sad that we're literally spending tens of billions of dollars on our industry. We're finally on the cusp of actually real cures with things like gene therapies, and yet people won't be able to get them. So imagine if they could.
Imagine if they could. I mean, that is the billion-dollar question right now, certainly here in America. And in Europe, do you get access to the same kinds of treatments? So here, you can get access to pretty innovative treatments. For example, I was in Brazil a few months ago, and this woman who was leading a cancer center there, doing remarkable work, was telling me the story about one of her family members had a brain tumor. And I said, so what did you do? She goes, I sent them to the States. Do they still have access to the same kinds of innovation?
So the innovation is pretty much the same. So when the European Commission approves a drug and the FDA, and in fact the Japanese as well, they tend to happen within months of each other these days. The difference is you negotiate with one payer in a country in Europe, yeah. And then the entire market opens. And as you know, the system in the U.S. is a bit more complex, multiple payers, multiple ways to essentially slow adoption, sometimes for good reason, but often for not. And that's the biggest difference. And I agree with you, if you want to have high-quality medical care and you live in another country and you have the money, sure, fly to New York or Boston. There are really good hospitals that will take care of you.
Yeah. So what do you think it would take to get us back on track to where we were before?
I think this is a lot of what we're hearing about around the world now, particularly in this country, and it's a centerpiece of some of the political conversations. How can patients get their medicines? how can the price of medicines be reasonable, but how can we at the same time eliminate the barriers to access, which usually are high out-of-pocket costs. And I think ultimately drug prices will need to come down, copays will need to go away. We will need to have an accelerated rate to bring biosimilars onto the market, which will reduce costs overall. And hopefully one day that real conversation will occur, because the political rhetoric doesn't really always line up with reality.
Right. Yeah. And getting everybody to work together. Like, one of the biggest things would be to get everybody, all the stakeholders in the room, and say, how would we redesign the system? Because if we were to design it from scratch, this is not how we would design it.
People have tried to get them all in the same room.
Yeah, it's hard, ain't it? Well, thank you for that. So I'm going to now go over to the clinical trial commercial side. Michelle, you've heard the R&D side of the equation. From the commercial and clinical trial side of the equation, what is your Imagine If statement?
So I think one of the things that we think about is, imagine if healthcare represented everyone, that it was completely inclusive. We talked a little bit about access, that everybody could access it, but it was inclusive of the globally. It was inclusive of people, the population globally. And you think about today, even though there's been a lot of strides made, when you think about, just 25 years ago, there was the NIH Revitalization Act that really was thinking about how do we get more women represented in clinical trials, right? And now there are a large majority, actually more than men, represented in clinical trials, but you don't always even see their data carved out, right? What's specific to them? They're inclusive and they're included, but maybe they're not, segmented to understand the uniqueness of that population. And then, I don't have to go through the data. When you think about other ethnicities, African Americans, Hispanics, they're woefully underrepresented.
And why is that? Tell us why that is.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of reasons. If you start with just how we do clinical trials in general, there's been a lot of advancement lately in how we do clinical trials, but in clinical trials traditionally, the way they're done, most of the investigators and the KOLs are of European descent, right? Whether you're in America or globally, they tend to be of European descent, and their patient populations aren't as diverse as they are, right? As they don't represent, right, a diverse population, and so that's part of the problem. Where the patients are is not where the actual clinical trial investigators are, right? So you have that challenge. I also think it's information, right? How people like to receive information, or how their culture and communities work, and understanding the different things that are going on and the opportunities for them. The information is not out equally or systematically for people to know that there's opportunities.
Right.
So I think there's
education, awareness,
absolutely.
access, all those things. So what would change all of that?
Well, I think there's a couple things that would change that. I think we have to think about diversity of the investigators. I also think we have to figure out how you can make every single doctor available to become part of a clinical trial. Like, how do you go to the actual doctor's office where the patients are? One of the things we're doing at Syneos Health is we have a partnership with Elligo to really try to do that. How do we actually get any patient in any office the opportunity to be part of a clinical trial? I think, going where those patients are. And I also think, one of the things the reason that I got really excited about this lab to life, you can call it molecule to market, as Taryn talks about it. We talk about it as lab to life. I think the thing that excites me about what we're doing is, we're really trying to figure out how do we take what we know. Like, I laugh. I think about all the things that we do on the commercial side to market drugs. So many of the things we do on the commercial side to market drugs are so important when you're trying to identify patients, communicate to patients, and thinking what channels they like to receive information in and how they like to be talked to, whether it's through their patient advocacy groups. It's not always the physician's office, right? And so if you just took some of the basic things you do as a marketer of a brand and think about bringing that back to the patient recruitment experience, I think that could change a lot of things.
So do it from an incentive perspective, like you're going to be selling to all of these patients, therefore you need to be able to identify with those patients. What about requirements? Is there somewhere that we should have requirements, a certain percentage of different populations?
Yeah. Well, I think we're trying to go there, right? I think there's been a huge effort on both the life sciences and biotech groups, as well as, frankly, challenging their CRO partners to think about how do we do a better job of identifying those patients. And I think there's a large willingness. Alistair, who's our CEO, he's part of ACRO, which they have these great conversations around, like, what should we really be doing to diversify the patient populations to address these issues? And so I think they're proactively looking for ways to do that so that it doesn't get to a requirement spot. I mean, I never like to be in a place where we're requiring things to be done, because I think we all know then there's gaps in that. And people find the ways to work within the rules that are given to them. So that's why I think that one of the things we have to be doing is really thinking about how do we reach communities in the way they want to be reached to get them more excited and see the opportunity about being part of a clinical trial. But it'll be interesting to see. If we have to go to regulations, I think we failed.
Sure. And certainly from an incentive perspective, when you think about the world's population, you have this incredible, huge population in Asia and Africa. 66% of the world's middle class will exist in Asia Pacific. Amazing. By 2030. The world is changing, and
Absolutely.
So we need to keep pace with all of that change.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Very good. All right, I'm going to come over to the design experience of healthcare. Amy, tell us, what's your imaginative statement?
So my imaginative is, imagine if we could humanize the health system. So we've done thousands of interviews with patients, clinicians, caregivers, family members, stakeholders, and the health system's sort of broken. No news there. The patient's left in the center of a disconnected ecosystem, and they're trying to navigate.
I think you're being very nice.
I try.
Yeah.
I try. So the patient's left in the center of a disconnected ecosystem, and they're trying to navigate on their own, and they don't know what companies they're even interacting with. We place the burden on them. They're sort of inmates of the asylum. The system and the experience of the system has sort of happened by default. It was never designed. The experience is the result of transactions and money flow and business relationships. And so I think what needs to happen and what is happening, and I've been very grateful to bear witness to, is the understanding that we need to understand what is going on in the real lives of patients. What is the context? What are their barriers? What are the social determinants? What's their goal? What's their value proposition? What is success for them? What are patient-defined outcomes? And what does that success look like? And so taking that understanding and letting it inspire us to improve experiences for them. But the sort of cognitive and emotional empathy isn't enough, right? Then what? What do we do with that? And so what we see being the hugest barrier is a lack of collaboration, of course, within siloed organizations where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, but also from organization to organization. So if you were to ask me, how do we fix the system? Well, the knee jerk would be blow it up. No, but to really fix it, we're going to have to do the messy work of collaborating across, from insurance to pharma, from insurance to health systems, from health systems to pharma, and we're going to need to keep the patient in the center and invite them to the table of innovation and design with them continuously, and not lose sight of that, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're in our fancy offices and we're in our collaboration spaces, and the patients aren't there. Mm-hmm. So how do we bring them into the fold? Yes, through clinical trial innovation, but also throughout the process. As well.
So what's it going to take for that to happen? I mean, is it going to take some orthogonal player to come in and blow it up? Like, is Amazon going to come in and completely disintermediate the system, and then we're finally going to get it? Or what is it that's going to make that happen?
Well, it's hard for organizations to disrupt themselves. It's going to take, good people like you who keep fighting the good fight and don't give up to start to kind of move the ship in the right direction. But I think partnerships, skunkworks operations, people building bridges, whether it's startups or whether it's large corporations, to do experiments, to do pilots, to look at not just business outcomes, absolutely clinical outcomes, but really what's our goal, and does our goal align with the human goal, okay? And once we align those things, it becomes quite clear through the ecosystem who we need to collaborate with to actually make those things happen. So it's sort of orienting our business strategy in the direction of what people actually need. And I think the more we talk about it, the better it's going to get. I mean, 10 years ago, empathy was like not even, talked about. Patient centricity and experience wasn't like a thing, and now it is, and that's encouraging.
And do you have an example of something like this?
Bringing parties together, or
yeah,
disruption?
An example where we've transformed the experience. So, for example, I come from the tech industry. Back in the day, years ago, we would invest in a psychologist for the user experience, right? So how are people using technology? How are they going to look at a website? And we'd have them come say, well, when somebody comes up, they do this and they do that, and they sit here and they sit there, and their families around them. And that was a critical component of tech, right? So when is that going to happen in healthcare? And do you have any examples of that, or even people working across these systems?
Yeah, sure. So we're actually piecing together multi-stakeholder collaborations to explore around shared objectives and bringing the patient to the table, doing participatory designing with folks. But in the spirit of disruption, we worked with a large health system who said, what if there were no hospital? What if we were able to meet patients' needs, in their home? And so that led to some technology and innovation that allowed for chronic condition management and clinical support 24/7, where if you took a measure and it was out of whack, you would get a call from a clinician in 2 minutes. So sort of closed loop. In addition, AI, health coaching, the whole kit and caboodle. The health system was stepping out and didn't want the rest of the health system to know about it, because they're saying, okay, we need to step out of our comfort zone. And we did it, and it worked. So, there are health outcomes associated. So when you sort of do it right, it can actually work.
Did they roll it out?
They rolled it out. They actually had to sell off the asset to a European health company. So now people in Sweden are enjoying this innovation.
There you go.
That's why people in Sweden are happier.
Yes.
Well, okay, so to bridge to that, because Ritesh, you are all things digital, right?
I've got the answer for all of you. Just digitize it.
And just digitize. Yes, we're all a bunch of ones and zeros.
Apply the machine. You can go home,
right.
relax.
Right.
Everything is good.
Okay, so tell us, what is your imaginative statement?
So I think, we are seeing the advent of some really amazing things from a digital perspective. Who would have thought 2 years ago pharma companies were looking at digital therapeutics as a business? You're talking about biologics and molecules and DNA, but there are people who are looking at technology as an answer, not a pill, not chemicals, but a piece of technology that may fix something like migraine.
So describe what that means to people so they know what you mean by digital therapeutics.
So that's basically,
Or an
instead
example.
of a pill or an injection, you're actually using technology to fix the problem, whatever that is. So in the case of migraine, what I saw recently from a French company, it's a wearable, you put it on your head, connected to a device that takes your baseline migraine, tracks it against a number of people, and then it starts using magnetic resonance on your head to fix your migraine. So is that a potential, and will that put Botox for migraine and Emgality out of business? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So that's a digital therapeutic, right?
Yeah.
So there are about 20 companies that I work with that are doing that. They're just looking at digital as a way of fixing something unique that won't require chemicals or a pill or an injection or some sort of infusion. It's technology.
Right.
So,
And in some cases, people talk about digital therapeutics, and it's really about behavior change. So we invest in a
could
company
be.
called Carrot, which is
Yeah.
smoking cessation.
Mango Health.
Which is you blow into this almost like a breathalyzer, and it gives you, after you smoke, and it gives you your carbon
That's right.
dioxide measurements and how much nicotine is going into your system as a way to deter you from smoking, right? So it requires behavior change, which is difficult, right? Unless you're properly really motivated to do it, it can work for a while, but not necessarily.
But I think it's a
always.
generational thing. I think, the generation that's coming through now are more used to these kinds of things. They are tracking their diets. They are tracking, you see those Instagram pictures or photos of the food. Hopefully they're tracking what they're eating, right? Those kinds of technologies are coming through. The imagine if for me would be, who's seen Big Hero movie?
Big Hero?
Big Hero, the white robots? All right, two of you are.
Two?
All right, 5 of you are hip.
Four.
The rest of you need to go home. Netflix,
We're not
big hero,
digitized enough.
right? Okay.
Yes.
So those of you who are hip in the room, you can come and have a drink with me later. So Big Hero is your personal health person.
Okay.
It's a robot, and as soon as they hear something's wrong with you, they come out of their little box and they scan you and they say, okay, this is what's wrong with you, and they fix it.
Oh, very good.
And it's all AI, and it's all right in your house. So your own personal physician.
Yeah.
Right? So that's possible. It's actually, if you can hack 6 things together today, you could actually do that today. The problem we have in the US is the system that's designed around it won't enable that. Because somebody has to insure it, somebody else has to deliver it, somebody else has to pay for it, somebody else has to manage it. Whereby if you look at what the NHS is doing in the UK, they've blown their entire thing up.
Well, they have Babylon, right? In the UK,
First one.
Babylon is actually
That's right.
an official GP. Babylon is your phone,
Yeah.
and you talk into your phone, and it asks you questions, and it diagnoses what your issue is.
Exactly.
It's really quite remarkable.
ADA's the same thing in Germany, right? ADA's done exactly the same thing for the German population. So now every German resident gets ADA as part of their health system. So you.
And so why won't this work here in
Well,
the US?
who'd pay for it?
All right, because it's prevention, right? So
Yeah.
part of what are the issues with payers covering these things?
Well, payers are trying to do it, but they're only one place, right? They're one piece of the puzzle. Somebody's going to have to prescribe it. Doctors won't, right? Telemedicine, technology's been around for 10 years, but it's only recently we've seen the uptake because CMS finally gave you a code to bill against. So until the billing system was caught up, the technology wasn't being used. But you still have another barrier, which is you cannot provide medical services from Wisconsin to Iowa.
Yeah.
You have to be accredited in both states.
Yeah.
Where in the UK, you can be in the Shetland Islands, you're part of the UK, and the doctor's sitting in London, and he can give you advice, and there's no bill. So that's the major ramification that we have. So we've got siloed infrastructure in this country where the technology is there, it can do all of these things, but the Swedes and the Brits and the Germans and the Japanese are taking advantage of it because they have a different system to be able
Right,
to
so they have a
deploy.
single payer system so they can coordinate and make those decisions.
Yeah, and they've taken, the NHS was very smart in their innovation. They took 10 use cases of stress that was being applied into the health system. So the first one was people walking through to the doctor's office saying, I've Googled my malady, my finger's going to fall off, I've got cancer. And it was just a boo-boo, put a Band-Aid on, off you go, right?
Yeah.
So they created your.md. Then Ada came along, Babylon came along, because they wanted to provide care to remote parts of the UK, right?
Right, which is a big
So-
issue everywhere, right?
Exactly.
Wherever you go, whether it's here with the VA, with veterans, right?
Yeah.
Most of them don't live in urban centers because
That's
they can't deal with all of that stimulation.
Yep.
But they can't get them care. Same with here in France, Brazil. It's a very common problem all over the world.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there you go. So I'd digitize everything and get rid of the silos.
All right, Teal, you're on.
Linda, you mentioned about behavior change and how we're very complicated human beings, and we are. We look at designing for behavior change and leveraging behavior science, psychology and motivation, human-centered design, data science, and leverage various models for identifying what are the person's obstacles to change. Is it capability? Is it opportunity? Motivation? What is it? What can empower change, and what's an obstacle to change? And that's helpful because in the U.S. specifically, again, they're ahead in Europe. The knee-jerk reaction is penalties and rewards in education. If people
So
just
loss and
knew
gain
they would
kind
do
of
it,
thing, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
If they knew they would do it, if we gave them $50, they would do it. Or if we said your insurance will cost more, they would do it. And that's just not true. There's more mature models for designing for behavior change, and it does come down to taking an evidence-based approach to design and leveraging psychology, and of course test and learn. But the problem too, though, is that we put the onus on everybody else to change. Like, oh, you patient, you need to be adherent, you need to be obedient, you need to do what we say. But there's a systemic problem, as our society yields sickness, right? And so, talking through partnerships, even partnerships with food industry, or looking at how urban environments are designed, or employment environments in our schools. That, speaking of prevention.
Sure, yeah. Ultimate is, could we imagine a world without disease, right? Which does require a lot of behavior change and in psychology. And speaking of behavior change. Imagine, David, if
Here he comes, David. Be ready.
the healthcare system, particularly all the big healthcare giants, whether it's pharmas or payers, could act more like a startup. So you've had the experience of bringing the most pivotal drugs to market here in the U.S. and around the world. It was part of a big company, and now you're on the other side. You're on the venture side, working with and part of small companies, so you had the experience of both. What's preventing some of these bigger players acting more like startups? Because if they acted more like startups, maybe we could get some of this change going on. What's preventing it from happening?
Well, I think, first of all, Pritesh convinced me we should digitize everything.
There you go. Well done. One
Clearly the right solution. So you're very persuasive.
I'll buy you a drink.
And I absolutely agree there's going to be digital solutions.
Yep.
I would also argue there still will be surgery and there'll still be medicines and a bunch of other things. And I don't know if the question really is, should big companies be like startups? We would like big companies, however, probably to move more quickly and still leverage what they do well. So big companies, for example, if you want to run a global phase 3 trial, don't ask some little startup to do it. They just don't have the infrastructure to do it, but a big global company can get that trial started, get the patients enrolled very, very quickly. Big global companies, when it comes to educating, commercializing their products, have skill sets all over the world, that are the scale provides all kinds of benefits. Having said that, there is a reason why there are lots of startups in San Francisco, in Boston, in Philadelphia, in Cambridge, in the UK, and it's because there is a lot of new science. The ability to manipulate biology has never been greater in our lifetimes, and bigger companies will take much longer to go down those paths because they want to be a bit more certain. And that really creative scientist, maybe it's a slightly crazy person who doesn't fit into the corporate culture, who doesn't want to make PowerPoint presentation after PowerPoint presentation about his or her project, just sort of gives up and then goes and works for the small companies. And one of the things I've noticed working now with small firms for the last 3 years, you are really focused on that one thing. It's life or death for you.
Right.
Either your technology, your project works, or you go work somewhere else.
Yeah.
So there's no distraction. It's all about getting there, learning, getting there quickly, bringing the best people together, and there's quite limited bureaucracy.
Is it a risk issue, though, David? I think the big company, a lot of it is risk mitigation. The first question,
take an even bigger picture. So if you're the CEO of a big pharma company, you're being paid on something called total shareholder return.
Yeah. Exactly.
75% of your income is equity. Half of that is based upon whether your stock outperforms the stock of the other big 15 companies. You're really probably not too worried about some technology that's going to come out in maybe 5 years, and then you're going to be losing money on it for another 5 years before it changes the world. However, if you're in a small company, there are investors, whether they be venture capitalists or others, who are willing to put that money at risk because they do get a return. When the big pharma company decides finally, I need to buy that asset, and now they pay 100 times what the original investment was.
That's right.
So it is an issue of risk. I would argue it's more about risk capital, and it's about the risk that the CEO and his executive team wants to take, given an incentive system which is not designed to take real risk.
And it goes all the way through the organization. You can go down to the brand manager level, and it's like 3 years. I'll launch and I'm done, and I'll move on, so it'll be somebody else's problem. So do I take the risk to innovate, or do I do what I do best for the next 2 years?
And it's not to say they don't innovate. They're clearly, I have some pharma friends in the room. There's lots of innovation going on in pharma. But it's different. It's like in the little company, to answer your question, everybody's focused on this thing. Every single day, every hour, you're making progress against this goal. It doesn't always work, but you're always moving forward. We're not going to the next meeting where we're going to sit there all day and not be sure why we were in the room at the end of the day. Right. Those meetings don't exist.
Yeah, no. We used to call it, in the tech industry, living on a burning platform, right? Yep. So I think it originally came from the CEO of Nokia wrote it to his employees. We have to live like we're on a burning platform. Like the oil rigs, when it's on fire, you have only two choices: put the fire out, or jump 100 feet into freezing cold water. So you're going to work your butt butt off to put out that fire. And that's what it's like to be in a startup, because you're not going to get paid, you're not going to get your reward, you're not going to realize your dream until you make it work. So you are singularly focused on that mission.
But there's a natural marriage between the two, because as I started, the smaller companies can't do what the big companies can do.
That's right. Yeah.
And it seems like the big companies are not doing what the smaller companies are doing. So at the right moments, they come together, and that's how you develop and you launch drugs currently.
Yep, that's right. Well, so that requires us all to think a little bit differently, and some of it is behavior change, some of it is knowing what we're good at and complementing each other at the right time, and some of it is, reflecting, having leadership that reflects the diversity of the people we're trying to serve. So, Michelle, imagine if the leadership of all of the big companies, the payers, the hospital systems, reflected our patients and our customer base. And by virtue of not reflecting them, I think we're failing our customers. So tell us why you think that's so.
So I think I don't know if we're completely failing our customers, but I think we could do more for them, right? I think that's the way I would describe it. And I mean, listen, there's so much research on diverse teams get better results. I mean, the research, people don't want to read it, but it's clear. There's so much documentation that diverse teams get better outcomes, right? And so you go back to shareholder value. I had a pull on that because I think that's great. If 75% of your compensation is tied to shareholder value, the number one thing you could do is build a diverse team to deliver medicines for patients, right? Because you're going to get different ways of thinking. You're going to get things that people maybe never thought were possible because they have a way they've always done it that has made them successful, and you kind of disrupt that way of thinking about things. And I think if you do that and you start really, in a perfect world, you look exactly like your customers, right? So if whoever your customer base is, your leadership looks like that, you're going to continue to develop things that really meet the needs of in our business, the ultimate, customer is the patient, right? Mm-hmm. And so if we're smarter about that and we're more deliberate, and I think we have to be deliberate, because I think diversity is an imperative in all of business, but I think in healthcare, it's just going, if you have a much better representation of diversity, you're going to go back to what I imagine, which is that healthcare really represents everyone, and you really understand the uniquenesses of different populations. We can kind of leapfrog where we've been today.
Yeah, and some leaders do it. I realize it's the minority, but some leaders do it, and some
industries do it as well.
Yeah, and you have as a leader, you have to go out and look for these people, and then you have to invest. Yeah. Because frankly, if you hire 7 or 8 people that look just like you, with all the downsides that come with it that you've articulated, it's a little bit easier to get them to do what you want them to do. If you hire 7 or 8 people that have completely different backgrounds, and I believe in this model, you have to invest a lot of time make that team high performing.
But David, you were in Switzerland for a while, right? So how did that work there? Because you've got a base that's a bit far out, and you've got a population base around you. So how do you... I mean, part of it is geography, part of it is where you are, part of it is the organization you're there.
The beauty of Swiss companies is that their home market doesn't matter.
Okay.
I mean, the reality, it was 2 to 3% of the sales volume. So it forced you to be truly global in your thinking. Having said that, you can still hire people that look like the CEO, or you can go out of your way and hire men and women, people of different sexual orientation, people of different life experiences. And then you have to invest the time.
That's the bit you're talking about.
I used to take my executive teams up to the top of Swiss mountains, where they couldn't do anything else, and we would spend days together talking about what's the vision for this company, what are our priorities, how do we interact, what's governance look like, how do we make decisions. And it was time-consuming, but the payoff was enormous because you have a more diverse group of people that brings different ideas and gets really excited about what they're doing, and then they can mobilize the rest of the workforce. But not everybody's going to make that effort. And if your time horizon is short as a leader, I would tell you not to bother doing it. If your time horizon is 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, don't bother, because the payoff takes longer. And the problem with total shareholder return, it pays you on that 1 year. It's a 1 year time horizon for most of these companies. So they have to get the stock price up this year, otherwise their equity doesn't vest and the CEO doesn't get paid. It's a really short-term focused system.
Note to self, don't be a CEO. You have to climb mountains and, yeah.
I think you are.
Well, it's the difference between
But I
an
think it's a
American
talent
system,
issue,
which
though.
is,
But it is a talent issue as well, I think.
it
You know,
is.
we do,
Yeah.
I think, you know, one of the biggest things as I wander around, if you look at a hospital, they've got the talent base, it's fairly diverse, nurses, doctors, etc. But as you go further out of that, the talent base isn't there. People aren't entering those things. People aren't going into these. So how do we get those diverse people to think about this industry as a place that they should come and work? What are those things that we need to do to
so
do
what
that?
is it? What is the answer to that?
I don't know.
But it's also getting.
I'll digitize it.
Yeah,
You
it's
don't-
still
You're gonna
digitized.
digitize everybody.
You want
it's-
people.
And I'll edit.
As far as I'm concerned.
It's the hard work of getting people to see their blind spot and understand their bias
Yeah.
toward hiring people like them. It takes intentionality.
To your point, right?
You have to be choiceful about it, and you have to make the choice because it's a good business strategy,
It is.
period, right?
So how do you do it? I mean, in your
Yeah.
organization.
It's you know, I
It's
don't
tough,
think
right?
we're perfect at it, but, you know, I do think that we're very intentional about it, right? And so I think to your point, it creates a lot more work. I mean, the traditional ways you recruit people, you can't traditionally recruit that way anymore, right? Because you're going to see the same people over and over again that look just like all of us, right? And so I think you have to be intentional about it. I think you have to invest in people early, right? So, and I think you have to teach a lot of people things that traditionally we don't train people on, or
Like what?
Right. So, like, you know, I think about data scientists. That's a great subject right now. Everybody is focused on data science and data, and how do you really manage these big data sets to get into really understanding what's going on, right? When you think about data scientists, they traditionally wouldn't think of coming to work for a life sciences company. Maybe a hospital system. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Google?
Not on their top 10 list. Well, that's why, you know, you think about Google and Amazon and everybody else where the disruption could occur, right? You know, they, in that space, you have to really go and build a value proposition, right? I'll give you an example. We're in India in MBA programs pulling data scientists right out of school right now and helping them understand the value of working in life sciences and how what they do every day will impact huge populations of patients. We're starting with right out of school. We give offers, you know, in the fall for them to come out in the spring. I mean, it's to your point, it's a long game, David. It's not a short game, right?
It's interesting. We just announced a partnership with UC Berkeley and UCSF. I got that right. To do these fellowships for data scientists over the course of like a 5-year period, and you know, paid for something like Stanford Biodesign. And we barely advertised it, and we had, I think, 275 people apply. Barely advertising it. So I think there is a desire to get into it now with the younger people coming in. And I think it will be a different future for the young leadership that is coming out of school now. But then there's the bridge from here to there. And how do you have leadership in these companies demonstrate the right behaviors and the right practices?
Exactly.
So
yeah, you got to work on people's potential, not necessarily what they know today.
yeah. So Ritesh, so you are all things digital, right? And you believe in the power of
Is this
technology.
really you, or is this a hologram?
I was going to say, can I
In fact, you're not really there.
Everybody says the same thing.
Yeah, that's
The
the
hologram. Because
hologram.
you're in like 7 places at once.
Yeah. What I like about it is I can just turn you off right
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
I don't like what you're saying.
Yes, but your computer won't work tomorrow morning. Don't worry. Yeah,
Zero. I just did a 0 on your one. Okay, so the power of technology is an amazing thing. And when I came into the healthcare industry from the tech industry, I was astounded by how little technology had infused itself into the industry. People were very suspicious of it. And when you think about how enabling, how powerful tech can be, I was really quite shocked by that. And over time, I think we've been slowly assimilating it and getting better at it, but there's a cultural difference here. What is that cultural difference? What does the suspicion come from, and how are we going to bridge that divide?
See, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be on a beach in Jamaica running a bar.
I thought you were, that this is
No,
the
it's a
hologram. Right here,
So
yeah.
I think part of it is very cultural. It is about the science of healthcare. You know, so It's the touch and the feel, and we do it this way. We've been doing it this way for years. I asked recently, why do we do faxes and for prior authorization?
Sure, sometimes
We do.
you're still getting faxes from your doctor.
Yeah. If you want prior authorization, you have to fax
Yes, that's
the
right.
application in. Today, 2020 coming
Yeah.
up. Work at Mount Sinai, there's a room with 7 fax machines in it.
Yes, there is.
That type these faxes out, drop in a bucket, and there's a lady who goes around picking them up and distributing.
Maybe we're hoping the faxes get lost so we don't have
There you go. That's
Yeah.
there you go. So I think part of it is structural, as I said to you before.
Yeah.
We've always done it this way. Something new comes along, we're not sure. The other bit is, I think the silos here particularly, and the curiosity isn't there to go explore these things. That's my biggest thing that I work on, is get people curious about this, get people excited about something. Because if you get them curious and excited, then they'll start wanting to do it. Otherwise, it's just like, okay, that's really good, but I'm going to go back to my e-detail because, I know the iPad works. And that's not the answer at the moment. Because not many doctors want to see the e-detail anymore. They're doing a chatbot and they're talking to Siri and they're doing all sorts of things like that. So I think that's one of the issues. I think the second issue is we always, and I find particularly in life sciences companies, fall behind the medical and regulatory will never approve it.
Say that again, sir?
Medical or regulatory will never approve it. All right. The biggest conversation is, show me something innovative. So we do, and they go, have you done it for somebody else? Well, it wouldn't be innovative if I've already done it.
You're hanging out with
What's the
me.
point?
That's my world.
That's obviously very convenient.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's what you're saying.
I mean the reality. I don't know if we have any FDA people in the room, but when a company does something for the first time, it's not like the FDA has the answer either.
That's right.
They work together to
That's
put the new
right.
guidelines in place. So.
Exactly.
Right.
And my first medical legal regulatory review, I was looking for people with books coming in, looking at paragraphs. And the guy looked at the other guy and said, what do you think? He said, I don't know. Should we approve it? Yeah, why not? Let's go for golf. Okay, so that's the problem, right? So there's a whole sort of, it's unknown, there's no regulatory framework. How do I do it? What are my guardrails? And if they're not defined, people won't take that risk.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the startups, the ones that are being brave and going through this, as you described, are saying, I'm not going to adhere to those things. I'm not from that industry. I'm going to see if I can, it's $1 trillion business. I'm happy with $2 billion. I'm happy with $1 billion, right? So that's what they're doing. And I think that's the issue we face. So get more curiosity going, go experiment, and try and figure these things out, I think is the biggest thing I would suggest.
Yeah. Well, and so, one of the privileges I have is to travel around the world and see many different technologies, as many of you do. Yeah. And one of the systems that I've been most amazed by, impressed by, is WeDoctor in China, which is invested in by Tencent, and it's a completely end-to-end digital system where every patient has their portal on their phone, or they have a portal at home, and they can go on and they can talk to their doctor. They can see all their doctors on their phone, and it does they put a bolt-on of Babylon that they can talk to. It diagnoses what they have, which are the doctors that could serve you. They can pick them, and they can schedule them right there, and how much they cost. They can pay from their phone. All of the rural hospitals have a very standardized set of equipment and technologies.
Did you see the red pods they're putting in the villages?
Yeah, so they have
Right.
the pods all over the villages, and then you have a big TV screen where you can do a satellite into a specialist in the urban hospital, and the urban hospitals are the specialist hospital. And on the back end of it, you can see on these big screens all over population statistics. You can see symptoms ebb and flow across the country, and where there's pockets of chronic diseases or if flu symptoms are coming up. It's the most remarkable thing. And because of that, when you get an intervention into the system, let's say a therapeutic, then you can calculate the savings to the entire system for that drug, which we can't do here in the US right now. And therefore you say, oh, this is a good system to use. So everybody wins in this system. So what's it going to take for us to have a system like that in the US? Is it possible?
No. Digitize it. No.
That is digitizing it.
Because again, I go back to my original statement. Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to prescribe it? Like, somebody has to have a cut. Which PBM is going to approve it alone? That's a big conversation by itself.
PBMs,
right?
yeah.
So I am hoping Haven and Verily and Apple are very, very successful, because they're the only ones with the heft and the balance sheets to be able to disrupt this thing. I don't think the startups will be able to do it by themselves. And I think, to your point, bringing the entire ecosystem together to serve a human and looking at the human in the middle to fix it is the only way to fix this thing.
Right.
I think otherwise it's just going to be this okay, I've got a payer solution that's going to hopefully entice you to lose weight because you're a diabetic. And then I've got a hospital solution that has a virtual nurse that will look after you, but they're not connected, right? That sort of thing.
It's very siloed, and it's a lot
Yeah.
of solutions looking for problems. There's not the leisure to look at holistically what are the gaps, what are the unmet needs, and how might we stretch our offering, our services, and integrate with others to actually bring something. I mean, what you were talking about is insurance, with care delivery, with technology, with public health, it literally is connecting all the dots, which, hopefully digitizing things and AI will help us start to connect those dots, but it's going to require human cooperation. And I mean, even inside of an organization, again, creating the mindset
Getting
of
the people.
curiosity,
The culture.
of innovation, of human centricity, of iteration, of an interdisciplinary approach, even just starting internally. But looking at, okay, what is our medium, right? Is our medium molecule? Is our medium digital? Is our medium a product? Is our medium a service? Or is our medium the partnerships and the ecosystem, right? It's a kind of a systems-based approach. And hopefully a mixture of academia and government. NIH is funding some nifty experiments, but honestly, we don't learn from what works many times. There's sort of already answers for some of this stuff, and it doesn't get going.
I think somebody close to it, Jeff Arnold at ShareCare and what they're doing, they're pretty close.
Who's that? What?
ShareCare down in Atlanta. And what they've done, they've got 90 million people now using their application, right? Tracking everything. And they've got all the data on the back end. So I asked him one day, I said, Jeff, what are you doing with that data? Are you going to payers and saying, I can give you statistics? Or are you going to the CMS and saying, I give you population? Because you've got 90 million people on this platform. You've got data about them. Are you giving it to the NIH or the CDC or whoever? I said, no, I didn't even think about that. But someone like that has that capability. They've got the infrastructure, they've got the people, they've got the apps, they've got the data, they're giving wearables to people, and they're connecting it to the EHR. So that could be something that could be really valuable.
So listen, we only have a couple of minutes left before we turn control over to the audience.
Wait, hold on. They get to ask something?
Yeah, get ready. So I'm going to ask each of you to give our incredible leaders out here one piece of advice as we go into the future, as we hit 2020 and we go into the next decade and start talking about 2030. What one piece of advice do you have for our leaders here in the room about how they can make their imagine if statements happen?
So I would say be brave. Be brave. Don't just do the status quo, because nothing worth doing is easy. So be brave. Do the things that you need to do to make a difference.
I'd say be curious and pick one thing. Don't try to boil the ocean. Go pick one thing that you're really passionate about that you want to change and figure that out.
I'd say get comfortable being uncomfortable, because none of this is easy, and keep getting up and doing it because people need you. This is one industry where lives absolutely depend on us. And also a spirit of humility. We don't have the answers, and that's going to give some openness and fuel that curiosity.
I would argue that very few of you will make big change on your own. It's going to be the people you hire and the effort you invest in them to make them into high-performing teams. And to make that happen, you need to take care of yourself, eat well, sleep, don't spend so much time on an airplane, and go to the gym. Find time to go to the gym. You'll live longer and you'll have a bigger impact.
Very good.
Well, what about you, Melinda? What's your...
I guess it would be say yes.
Okay, there you go.
Say yes. When people come to you with opportunities or challenges or, here's something you can do, many times we're like, no, somebody else is doing that or somebody else is going to take that on. But say yes, because you can do it. And if you surround yourself with good people, if you get comfortable being uncomfortable, and if you're curious and ask a lot of questions, and you're brave enough to do it, you can make change happen. And listen, we always think somebody else is going to do it. somebody else
Yeah.
isn't going to do it. You can do it. And imagine the difference you can make in someone's life. And it can be big. Maybe you can cure a certain kind of cancer, or maybe you can empower a group of people that never believed in themselves before. No one else believed in them. What an amazing difference you can make in somebody's life by just saying, I believe in you. So you can make a difference. Say yes. Cool. That's my answer.
Can we have a big round of applause? Amazing. Would you all like to be brave and ask a question and make yourself uncomfortable? And I'll find my way to the gym someday, but in the meantime.
And tell us who you are, because we can't see any of this.
Yeah.
Yes, so Dr. Jules Mitchell, would you like to ask the first question?
Thanks a lot. Jules Mitchell, Target Health. I think this was the best conversation that PharmaVOICE has ever had. I want to congratulate you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well done.
We've had some pretty good ones.
I don't necessarily want to be digitized. That's it. But all that aside, the whole issue of change is a really big thing. And I think the other thing with change has to do with regulators, not just the pharma industry. And part of the problem is we have to educate the regulators. So we're involved with with Harvard on educating regulators on ICH, E6, R2 kind of stuff, as opposed to just doing training. But I think the regulators have to really be educated. Today we were on a call where in Rett syndrome, where they turned something down, not a drug, but they said there's no placebo, okay, in Rett syndrome, okay? And therefore they won't give them breakthrough therapy or something like that, beyond silly, okay? So I think we also have to educate not just the farm industry, which is risk averse, there's no question about it, but I think we also have to work on the regulators, worrying about whether or not, an audit trail is, 27 becomes a 28, things like that, which I'm sure Microsoft is interested in. But we have to start thinking about educating people about the things that matter. Quality is the absence of errors that matter, and are the data fit for purpose, not whether someone enters a 2 or a 3, and therefore we beat them up because 3 is the wrong number. So just think about it. It's not just the pharma industry, which has their own problems.
Very true.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great point.
Other question? Oh, I'm sorry, in the back.
Hi, I'm Kamala Madali. I'm the president of Health Collaborations. I'm a MS patient, diagnosed 8 years ago. I'm a cancer scientist and a business strategist. Very inspiring, really, I would say, brainstorming session. Mostly since 10 plus years. I've been at Merck, Quest Diagnostics, and Quintiles. One take home for everybody through my own personal and professional journey is be the change you want to see. If there is an idea, communicate. If there is a gap, connect. And my journey has been, we are walking galaxies. So, Ritesh, to your comment, not just digital, I think we need to really research into telescopes within our own human body. Forget about Mars, forget about Moon. So, really, this is phenomenal.
Thank you.
I think everyone should really serve on a patient advocacy organization right here and then connect the voice of the patients to the changes that needs to come from regulators and insurance companies and the government, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Kamala.
you.
We have time for one more question. Anybody? All right, I have a question. What are they going to do with all those fax machines when you be completely digitized?
They're turning into robots. They're going to be drone delivery guys for Amazon.
Repurpose the parts.
Yeah.
You're going to recycle
Parts.
the parts.
I'd like to say that's upcycling. I love it.
Yes.
So I want to thank our panel again. Please join me in a round of applause.
Well done.
Could I ask you back to join the seats? Thank you. So thank you again to Synovian, our executive forum sponsor, for your generous support. We'd also like to thank our other sponsors who made tonight possible. Our platinum sponsor, PowerXL. Yes. Our gold sponsors, Calcium, Cognizant, Ogilvy, Publicis. Our silver sponsors, Advanced Clinical, Alnilem, BioClinica, Medidata, Microsoft, and Navigant, and TBWA World Health. Our bronze sponsors, Bioforum, Clarify Health Solutions, Health Union, Insignium, Levlane Life Sciences, and MadPow. We would also like to thank our Celebration Publication advertisers for their support. Thank you all so very much. So this is our transition into the award ceremony part of the evening. Oh, and there's music to go with it. In 2015, we initiated our version of a Hall of Fame, the Red Jacket Awards. One of the criteria for being named a Red Jacket is having been recognized as a PharmaVOICE 100. But it's so much more than that. These extraordinary individuals cross a multitude of industry sectors. They raise the bar in what it means to be an inspired leader for their teams, their companies, their communities, and for the industry at large. Our Red Jacket honorees challenge us to think differently, act differently, and lead differently. They are creating new opportunities to make what was once impossible, possible. They are focused beyond short-term gains and are committed to executing their long-term visions in a tightly regulated and competitive industry. They have a persistence of vision. And they are truly transforming the life sciences industry to create better health outcomes for all. They are inspired leaders for today and for tomorrow. In 2019, we recognized 6 new inductees to the Red Jacket community. Before I call to the stage the 2019 Red Jacket honorees who are here with us this evening, I would like to acknowledge Nancy Berg, CEO and Executive Director of ISPOR, the Professional Society for Health Economics and Outcomes Research, Chris Perkin, CEO of Alta Sciences, Dr. Ryan Sadi, VP Global Evidence, Market Access and Pricing at CSL Behring, and Tim Walbert, Chairman, President, CEO, and founder of Horizon Therapeutics, who regretfully couldn't join us tonight. I do encourage you to read all about these amazing leaders in the July-August issue. But tonight is the night for a couple of our folks. Our first Red Jacket inductee tonight is Craig Lipset, who is all about democratizing the future of healthcare. Clinical innovator, disruptor, visionary, technologist, and patient. These are just a few of the adjectives that describe Craig and the incredible impact he has had on the field of clinical research. His focus on patient engagement, patient centricity, 21st century digital clinical trials, and collaborations with industry consortia, federal agencies, and technology companies are just a few examples of where he is making a huge difference. He self-identifies as a patient, and he passionately believes that we can no longer live with fictional boundaries and deny that all patients and our caregivers. He aspires to create a legacy that transforms how patients participate in research through the democratization of the process and remove the silos that create barriers to care. Craig, who recently left Pfizer as head of clinical innovation, is now entering the next chapter of his innovative journey, and I, for one, can't wait to see what he does next. Please join me in warmly welcoming Craig Lipset, 2019 Red Jacket honoree, to the stage.
Thank you, PharmaVOICE. Thank you.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Anal Purohit, who has been charting her own course for more than 3 decades. Anal has broken all the conventional rules in her own unique way as a woman and as a minority. And as a result, she has evolved Purohit Navigation, the company she co-founded, into a successful, enduring, and innovative company that is redefining the label of advertising agency. Anal entered into the healthcare communications world almost 35 years ago with a PhD in psychometrics and the goal to offer life sciences companies research-based insights, deep strategic and scientific thinking, and breakthrough creative that would truly change behavior. And ever since, under Anal's stewardship, Porowit Navigation has been at the forefront of some of the industry's most groundbreaking ideas and campaigns. Anal's humor, warmth, passion, compassion, creativity, and intelligence are evident to everyone she engages with, and coincidentally, these same traits are at the heart of a company culture that is designed to consistently innovate and one that fosters deep loyalty among its employees and its clients. She is not just a champion for women in the life sciences, she's also co-founded the nonprofit organization African Women's Alliance in Support of Health. Anal has unselfishly laid the ground for the next generation of leadership at the company. It's my privilege and delight to welcome 2019 Red Jacket honoree Dr. Anal Porowit to the stage. Finally, we are delighted to recognize Dr. Frida Lewis Hall, who was named a Red Jacket honoree in 2015. Frida was recently named as Pfizer's first Chief Patient Officer. During her 35-year career in medicine, Frida has been on the front lines of healthcare as a clinician, researcher, and leader in the biopharmaceutical and life sciences industries. An award-winning advocate for health equity and improved outcomes for all patients, she provides advice and consumer information on national programs such as Dr. Phil and The Doctors, and is a regular speaker making dozens of appearances a year at consumer and healthcare conferences. Additionally, Frida was recognized as the Woman of the Year by the Healthcare Businesswomen's Association in 2011. Congratulations again, Frida. All right, you're almost done with me. So thank you again to all of our sponsors. We couldn't do it without you. And now, for those who know me, you know what time it is. It's cocktails. Thank you all for coming. Please enjoy our signature drink of the evening, the Red Jacket.